The Volantis scrapyard was where ships came to die, and Kira Vance had spent the last 6 years learning their secrets among the floating graves of metal and memory. She moved through the debris field in her small salvage craft, her gloved hands steady on the controls as she navigated, past the skeletal remains of freighters and the crumpled hulls of ancient warships that nobody remembered anymore. The red dwarf star at the center of this system cast everything in shades of rust and blood. A dying light for a place filled with dead things. Kira liked it here, if she was being honest with herself. There was something peaceful about working alone among the wreckage, bringing pieces back to life that everyone else had given up on. She had built her reputation on fixing the unfixable, on looking at machines that experts had declared beyond salvation and finding the one thing they had all missed. It was not magic, and it was not luck. It was patience and stubbornness and a refusal to accept that anything was truly beyond repair. Her community crackled to life, breaking the comfortable silence she had been enjoying for the past 3 hours. Human designation Kira Vance. A clicking, chittering voice said through the speaker. We request your presence at coordinates 7-7-Mark-4 for a matter of significant importance and considerable compensation. Kira raised an eyebrow at the formal tone and the promise of money in the same breath. She recognized the speech pattern immediately. The Sithrani were an ancient insectoid species who had been traveling the stars. When humanity was still figuring out how to make fire, they were known for 2 things: their incredible technology and their absolute certainty that no other species could ever match their brilliance. For them to contact the human mechanic meant something had gone very wrong indeed. What is the job? Kira asked, keeping her voice neutral, even as curiosity burned in her chest. There was a long pause, and she could almost feel the discomfort radiating through the com channel. We have located one of our ancestral vessels, the Sithrani representative finally said. A ship from what your species would call our golden age. A vessel of great historical and cultural significance. And you need me to fix it, Kira said, not bothering to hide her amusement. Another pause. Longer this time. Our engineers have been unable to restore it to functional status, the voice admitted. And Kira could hear how much it cost them to say those words. We have heard rumors that humans possess a certain talent for mechanical restoration that defies logical explanation. Kira grinned and turned her ship toward the coordinates they had sent. She had never worked on Sithrani technology before, and the chance to get her hands on something from their legendary past was too good to pass up. When she arrived at the location, she understood immediately why they had been so reluctant to ask for help. The ship floating before her was unlike anything she had ever seen. A massive vessel that seemed to be made of crystal and light and something that looked almost like living tissue. It stretched nearly 1 kilometer long, its hull covered in geometric patterns that caught the dim red starlight and scattered it into rainbows, even dead and dark. It was the most beautiful thing Kira had ever laid eyes on. The Sithrani delegation met her at the docking port. 3 tall insectoid beings with iridescent carapaces and multifaceted eyes that watched her with a mixture of hope and barely concealed disdain. This is the Sunweaver, the lead Sithrani said, gesturing toward the dark vessel with one of its 4 arms. It was built 3,000 years ago during the height of our civilization. Powered by technology, we have since lost the ability to replicate. What kind of power source? Kira asked, already running her eyes along the ship's graceful lines and trying to imagine what systems lay beneath that crystalline skin. Pure starshine, the Sithrani said, and there was reverence in its clicking voice. Raw stellar energy harvested directly from the hearts of stars and contained within the ship's core. It was the greatest achievement of our species, and now it sits dead in the void. And we cannot wake it, Kira felt a shiver run down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold of space. She had heard legends about the Sunweavers, ships that could drink light itself and turn it into power beyond imagination. But she had always assumed they were myths, exaggerations passed down through generations. To stand before one now, to know that she might be able to touch it and work on it and maybe even bring it back to life, made her heart race with excitement. "Show me the inside," she said. And the Sethrani led her through the docking tube and into the ship itself. Walking through the corridors of the Sunweaver was like walking through a dream. The walls were made of a translucent material that might have been crystal or glass or something that had no name in any human language. Conduits ran along every surface. Delicate tubes that had once carried light and power through the ship like blood through veins. Now they were dark and cold. Empty channels waiting to be filled again. Kira ran her hand along the wall as she walked, and she could have sworn she felt something respond to her touch, a faint tremor, a whisper of warmth that faded as quickly as it appeared. "The core chamber is this way," her Sethrani guide said, and they led her deeper into the ship until they reached a vast circular room at the very heart of the vessel. In the center of the chamber stood a structure that looked like a cage made of silver and crystal. Delicate bars curved inward toward an empty space where something magnificent had once lived. The star fragment was housed here, the Sethrani explained. A piece of living stellar matter that powered every system on this ship. It died long ago, and without it, the Sunweaver cannot function. Kira walked slowly around the cage, studying it from every angle, letting her mechanics instincts take over as she absorbed every detail. She noticed the way the crystal conduits all led back to the central point like roots reaching toward a sun. She noticed the strange organic quality of the technology, the way it seemed designed to grow and adapt rather than simply operate. And she noticed something else, something the Sethrani had apparently missed in all their examinations. The cage was not empty, deep in the very center, so faint that it was barely visible. A single note of light flickered for just a moment before going dark again. Kira smiled and turned to face the Sethrani delegation. "I will take the job," she said. And for the first time in 3,000 years, the Sunweaver stirred in its sleep. Kira spent her first week on the Sunweaver simply walking through its corridors and touching its walls, and trying to understand what kind of machine she was dealing with. The Sethrani had given her access to everything they had. Old schematics that were barely readable after 3,000 years. Historical records that spoke of the Sunweavers in language that sounded more like poetry than engineering. And a team of their best technicians who watched her every move with those unblinking, multifaceted eyes. She ignored most of their advice and all of their skepticism. The ship was not like anything she had worked on before. Not like the human vessels she had grown up repairing. Not like the alien freighters she had salvaged over the years. It was something else entirely. Something that seemed to blur the line between machine and living creature. The more time she spent aboard, the more convinced she became that the Sunweaver was aware of her presence in some dim and distant way. She would enter a room and feel a subtle shift in the air, a sense of attention turning toward her like a sleeping animal. Lifting its head at the sound of footsteps, she would run diagnostic tools along the crystalline conduits and swear she could feel something responding, something reaching out toward the warmth of her hands. The Sethrani thought she was imagining things. "The ship is dead," Chief Engineer Vithras told her on the 8th day, his clicking mandibles expressing what might have been impatience or pity. "There is no awareness, no consciousness. Nothing but cold machinery waiting for a power source that no longer exists. Then why does it feel like it is listening to me?" Kira asked at Vethris made a sound that was probably laughter in his species. "Humans are known for your tendency to project emotions onto inanimate objects. he said. "It is considered one of your more charming weaknesses." Kira did not argue with him because she was too busy studying the core chamber and the strange silver cage at its center. She had not told the Sethrani about the flicker of light she had seen on her first day, partly because she was not sure what it meant, and partly because she did not trust them to react well to the information. They were so convinced that revival was impossible that any evidence to the contrary might cause them to abandon the project entirely. Instead, she threw herself into understanding how the ship actually worked. She traced power conduits from one end of the vessel to the other, mapping out a system that was far more complex than anything the Sethrani had shown her in their ancient diagrams. She discovered that the crystal walls were not just decorative. They were part of an integrated network that channeled energy throughout the entire structure, amplifying and distributing it with an efficiency that made human technology look primitive. And she found something that changed everything. She thought she knew about the vague sunweaver hidden in the walls of the core chamber, buried beneath layers of crystal and circuitry that the Sethrani had never thought to examine. She found the biointerface. It was a chair, or something like a chair, made of the same organic-looking material as the rest of the ship. Neural connectors sprouted from its surface like delicate vines, designed to link directly with a living mind. Kira stared at it for a long time before the realization hit her like a punch to the chest. "This is not just a ship," she whispered to the empty room. "This is a partnership." She called Vithris and the other Sethrani engineers to the core chamber and showed them what she had found. They clustered around the biointerface with expressions of confusion and something that might have been fear. "We have no records of this system," Vithris said, his voice unusually quiet. "Our histories speak only of the star fragment and its power. They say nothing about a pilot interface of this nature. Maybe that is why your histories are incomplete," Kira said, running her fingers along one of the neural connectors and feeling that familiar whisper of warmth beneath her touch. Maybe the ships were designed to bond with their crews, to form a connection that went beyond just operating controls and reading displays. "That is speculation," Vithris said. But he did not sound entirely convinced of his own words. "Then let me speculate a little more," Kira replied. "What if the star fragment was not just a power source? What if it needed something from the crew to keep burning? What if the ships were symbiotic, drawing energy from the emotions and life force of the people who flew them?" The Sethrani were silent for a long moment, and Kira could see them processing this idea, trying to fit it into their understanding of their own history. That would explain certain anomalies in the historical records. One of the younger engineers said hesitantly, "There are accounts of sunweavers that flew perfectly for one crew, but refused to function for another. Our ancestors attributed it to technical incompatibility. But perhaps they just did not love their ships enough." Kira finished. Vithris made that laughing sound again, but this time it carried a note of bitterness. "The Sethrani are not a species known for emotional attachment to machinery," he admitted. "We value efficiency, logic, precision. The idea that our greatest achievements required something as irrational as love is not a comfortable one." Kira nodded slowly, understanding now why the Sethrani had been unable to revive the Sunweaver despite all their technical expertise. They had approached it as a problem to be solved, a broken machine to be repaired, when what it really needed was something they could not give. The star fragment had not simply run out of fuel. It had starved to death, alone and unloved in the cold darkness between the stars. "I think I know what to do," Kira said. And she saw hope flicker in Vethris's compound eyes despite his obvious skepticism. "But you are not going to like it. And you are going to tell me it is impossible." "Everything about this situation is impossible," Vithris replied. "We might as well hear one more impossibility." Kira smiled and looked up at the silver cage where a dead fragment of starlight waited for someone to remember what it felt like to burn. I'm going to wake it up, she said. Not with technology, not with power cells or fuel injections or any of the things you have already tried. I am going to wake it up the old way, the way your ancestors must have done it 3,000 years ago. And how is that? Vithris Askira placed her hand on the biointerface and felt the ship tremble beneath, her touch like a sleeping creature on the edge of dreaming. I'm going to make it remember what it feels like to be alive, she said, and I am going to show it that someone still cares. The Zathrani thought she was insane, and Kira could not really blame them for that. She had spent the last 3 days modifying the bio-interface with every piece of compatible technology she could scavenge from her own ship and the surrounding scrapyard. Neural amplifiers designed for human brains now sat alongside ancient Zathrani circuitry, jury-rigged together with cables and adapters that looked like they belonged in a junk heap rather than on a legendary vessel. Vithris watched her work with a mixture of fascination and horror. This will kill you, he said. Not for the first time. Human physiology is not designed to interface with stellar energy. Even our own species would not attempt what you are proposing. Your own species could not revive this ship with 3,000 years of trying, Kira replied without looking up from her work. So maybe it is time to try something that your species would never do. She connected the last cable and sat back on her heels, surveying her creation with a critical eye. It was ugly, and it was dangerous, and it had maybe a 30% chance of working without frying her nervous system. Those were better odds than she had expected. The other Zathrani engineers had stopped pretending to work on their own diagnostics and were now openly watching her, their multifaceted eyes tracking every movement she made. They had tried to stop her twice already, citing safety protocols and liability concerns and about a dozen other excuses that boiled down to simple fear. Kira had ignored them. She had not come this far to let bureaucracy stop her. The interface is ready, she announced, standing up and stretching muscles that had grown stiff from hours of delicate work. I am going to attempt the connection in 1 hour. Anyone who wants to leave should do so now. Nobody moved. Kira used the hour to prepare herself mentally and physically for what was about to happen. She ate a small meal, drank plenty of water, and spent 20 minutes in quiet meditation, trying to center herself the way her grandmother had taught her when she was just a child learning to fix broken toys in their family workshop. She thought about why she had become a mechanic in the first place, the joy of understanding how things worked, the satisfaction of bringing something back to life, the deep belief that nothing was ever truly beyond repair if you just refused to give up. She thought about the Sunweaver and the 3,000 years it had spent drifting alone in the dark, forgotten and abandoned by the species that had created it. She thought about that tiny flicker of light she had seen in the core, that stubborn spark that had somehow survived millennia of neglect. You and me both, she whispered to the ship. We are both too stubborn to just lie down and die. When the hour was up, Kira walked to the biointerface and lowered herself into the chair. The neural connectors reached up toward her like eager tendrils, and she felt them brush against her temples, her spine, the base of her skull. They were cold at first, cold and lifeless like everything else on this dead ship. Beginning neural link, she said, and she activated the interface. The connection hit her like a wave of ice water, and for a terrible moment she could not breathe, could not think, could not do anything but drown in the vast emptiness that the Sunweaver had become. She felt the ship's loneliness as if it were her own. 3,000 years of silence pressing down on her chest like a physical weight. She felt its confusion, its dim awareness that something was happening, but no understanding of what or why, and beneath it all, buried so deep that she almost missed it, she felt something else, a tiny spark of hope, fragile and flickering, waiting for someone to fan it back into flame. "I am here," Kira said, not with her voice but with her mind, reaching out toward that distant light with everything she had. "I came for you. You are not alone anymore." The ship stirred around her, and she felt its attention focus on her like a searchlight sweeping through fog. It did not understand her words. Not exactly, but it understood her intent. Someone was here. Someone cared, for the first time in 3,000 years. Someone was trying to wake it up. Kira pushed deeper into the connection, pouring her memories and emotions into the link like fuel into a fire. She showed the Sunweaver her childhood. Long summer days spent taking apart machines and putting them back together again. She showed it her first successful repair, a broken water pump that had kept her family alive during a drought year when everyone else had given up. She showed it every impossible fix she had ever accomplished. Every time someone had told her that something could not be done, and she had proven them wrong, and she showed it something else. Something she had never shared with anyone, her deepest fear. The terror that one day she would face a problem she truly could not solve. That she would finally have to admit defeat and accept that some things really were beyond saving. But not you. She told the ship, "Not today. I am not giving up on you, so you do not get to give up either." The Sunweaver trembled, and deep in its core something began to change. Kira felt the star fragment respond to her emotions, drawing strength from her determination, feeding on her refusal to accept the impossible. It was like watching an ember catch fire, like seeing dawn break after the longest night. The light grew stronger, brighter, and Kira felt warmth spreading through the neural link as the ship began to remember what it was supposed to be. Then the pain hit. It felt like being struck by lightning while drowning in the heart of a sun. Every nerve in her body screaming as stellar energy poured through the connection and into her fragile, human form. She heard Vithras shouting something in the distance, heard the monitors screeching alarms that nobody needed to understand. Her heart stuttered, stopped, and for one endless moment Kira Vance died in the embrace of a ship that was finally starting to live. But the Sunweaver was not ready to lose her. Not after 3,000 years of waiting for someone like her to come along. It reached back through the link, pouring its own awakening strength into her failing body, refusing to let her sacrifice go to waste. Her heart beat once, twice, and then settled into a steady rhythm that matched the pulsing glow now spreading through the crystalline walls of the core chamber. Kira opened her eyes and saw the Sethrani staring at her in disbelief behind them. The silver cage at the center of the room was no longer empty. A sphere of golden light hung suspended within, no larger than her fist, but burning with the fierce intensity of a captive star. "Hello there," Kira whispered, and she felt the Sunweaver whisper back, grateful and warm and finally awake. Kira lay in the biointerface chair for 3 days while her body recovered from the trauma of touching a star. The Sethrani medical teams hovered around her constantly, scanning her vital signs with instruments that beeped and clicked in concerned rhythms. Unable to understand how she had survived what should have been instant death, she could have told them that she was not alone anymore, that something was keeping her alive and healing the damage that the initial connection had caused. But she did not think they would believe her. The Sunweaver was everywhere now, a warm presence at the edge of her consciousness that never left her even when she slept. It felt like having a best friend who lived inside your head, someone who understood you better than you understood yourself, and who loved you anyway. When Kira finally opened her eyes on the 4th morning, the ship sang to her. It was not music in any way that humans would recognize, not notes or melodies or harmonies, but rather a feeling that translated itself into sound somewhere deep in her brain. The Sunweaver was happy. truly and purely happy, and it wanted her to know it. "Good morning to you too," Kira said, her voice rough from disuse, and she felt the ship's joy pulse even brighter in response to her words. Vethris was standing at the edge of the core chamber, watching her with an expression she had learned to recognize as Sethrani uncertainty behind him. The crystalline walls were alive with flowing light, golden streams of energy racing through conduits that had been dark for 3,000 years. "You have been unconscious for 72 of your human hours," he said, and there was something almost gentle in his clicking voice now. "We were not sure you would wake up." "Neither was I," Kira admitted, pushing herself slowly into a sitting position and wincing at the protests from muscles that had been still for too long. But the ship had other plans. She looked up at the silver cage where the star fragment burned, and she felt its attention focus on her with what could only be described as affection. It was not the same fragment that had died 3,000 years ago. That light was gone forever, consumed by centuries of neglect and loneliness. This was something new, something born from her own stubborn refusal to accept defeat, fed by human emotions that the original Sethrani designers had never anticipated. The Sunweaver understood that its heart was different now, and it did not mind different was not worse. It was just another way of being alive. "We have been monitoring the ship's systems," Vethris said, gesturing toward a group of engineers who were clustered around portable displays with expressions of amazement. "Everything is coming back online. Life support, navigation, propulsion, weapons, all of it responding to the new power source as if it had never been offline. But that is not the most remarkable thing," one of the younger engineers added, stepping forward with barely contained excitement. "The energy signature is completely different from our historical records. The original star fragments burned with what we would call a cold light, efficient and stable and predictable. And this one?" Kira asked, though she already knew the answer. "This one burns hot," the engineer said. "Chaotic, emotional, alive in a way that our science cannot explain. It fluctuates with your heartbeat, Kira Vance, and when you were unconscious." The entire ship dimmed in sympathy. Kira smiled and placed her hand against the wall of the core chamber, feeling the Sunweaver lean into her touch like a cat seeking affection. "It is bonded to me," she said, not as a question but as a simple statement of fact. "The ship and I are connected now, linked in a way that cannot be broken." "Yes," Vethris said, and she heard the weight of that single word, the acknowledgement of something his species had built but never truly understood. "You are its heart now, just as the star fragment is its power. Without you, it would dim again. With you, it could fly forever." The implications of that statement hung in the air between them. Kira was no longer just a salvage mechanic from a scrapyard. She was the living core of a ship that had once been the pride of an ancient civilization. A vessel that could drink starlight and travel distances that would take human ships centuries to cross. "The Sethrani Conclave will want to study you," Vethris continued. "They will want to understand how you accomplished what our best engineers could not. There will be offers of wealth and status beyond anything you have ever imagined. And if I say no?" Kira asked, and Vethris was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke again, there was something like respect in his voice. "Then you will be free to go," he said. "The Sunweaver is yours now, by every law and custom we possess. We may have created it 3,000 years ago, but you are the one who brought it back to life. That gives you a claim that supersedes our own." Kira nodded slowly. Feeling the ship's approval warm in her chest like a second heartbeat, she stood up from the bio-interface, testing her legs and finding them steady despite everything she had been through. Core chamber looked different now that it was alive. The walls glowing with soft golden light, the air humming with contained power that she could feel on her skin like summer sunshine. "Take me to the bridge," she said. And the Sunweaver responded before Vethris could even open his mouth. panels sliding open to reveal a corridor that had been hidden behind blank walls just moments before she walked through her ship for the first time as its bonded pilot. And every step felt like coming home. The bridge was a circular room at the front of the vessel, dominated by a massive curved window that looked out into the star-filled void control. Panels that had been dark and dead now flickered to life as she entered, holographic displays materializing in the air to show her everything from engine status to navigational charts. There was a chair at the center of it all, different from the bio-interface, but connected to the same neural network, and when Kira sat down in it, the Sunweaver wrapped around her mind like a comfortable blanket. "Show me what you can do," she whispered. And the ship showed her stars within reach, distances that meant nothing to a vessel that could ride beams of light across the galaxy. Speeds that would have torn any human ship apart, but felt as natural as breathing to the tune the Sunweaver was waiting for her command, eager to fly again after so long in the dark. And Kira felt its excitement mixing with her own until she could not tell where she ended and the ship began. The Sethrani watched from the doorway of the bridge, and for the first time in 3,000 years, they understood what their ancestors had truly built. Not just a ship, not just a wonder of engineering, but a partner, a companion, a friend that would carry its chosen pilot to the ends of the universe and back. "Where will you go?" Vithras asked. Kira looked out at the stars and smiled. "Everywhere," she said, and the Sunweaver hummed in agreement. Word spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass, carried by traders and diplomats and travelers who could barely believe what they were reporting. A human had revived a Sunweaver, not a team of scientists, not a consortium of the greatest engineering minds in the known universe, but a single human mechanic from a junkyard orbiting a dying star. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Representatives from a dozen species arrived at the Volantis scrapyard within the first week, their ships crowding the debris field as they jockeyed for position to see the legendary vessel and the woman who had brought it back to life. The Sethrani conclave sent their highest officials, ancient beings whose carapaces were decorated with the honors of centuries, to formally acknowledge what had happened and to make Kira an offer that would have made most humans faint with greed. They offered her citizenship in their civilization, a status that had never been granted to an outsider in their entire history. They offered her wealth beyond counting, resources from 1,000 worlds, access to technology that humanity would not develop for another millennium. They offered her immortality, or as close to it as their science could provide, treatments that would extend her lifespan to match that of the Sethrani themselves, so that she could continue piloting the Sunweaver for centuries to come. Kira listened politely to every offer, sitting in the captain's chair on the bridge of her ship while the golden light of the star fragment painted everything in shades of warmth and power. Then she said, "No, I appreciate everything you are offering," she told the assembled dignitaries, feeling the Sunweaver's quiet amusement at their shocked expressions. "But I did not revive this ship to become a museum piece or a research subject or a symbol of your ancient glory. Then what do you want?" the senior Sethrani representative asked, and Kira could hear genuine confusion in his clicking voice. Unable to comprehend why anyone would refuse such generosity. "I want to fly," Kira said simply. "I want to see what is out there, beyond the edges of the maps, past the borders of explored space. I want to find out what this ship can really do when it is not being studied and analyzed and treated like an artifact." "But the scientific value," another representative began, "will still be there when I come back," Kira interrupted. "If I come back?" The Sunweaver has been sitting still for 3,000 years, and I think it deserves a chance to run. She felt the ship pulse with approval, its consciousness wrapping around hers in a warm embrace that made words unnecessary. The Sunweaver wanted the same thing she did: freedom, adventure, The vast unexplored darkness between the stars. It had spent too long being dead to waste its new life sitting in a laboratory. The Sithrani delegation withdrew to confer among themselves, their clicking conversations too fast and too complex for Kira to follow. She did not need to understand their words to know what they were discussing. They were trying to find a way to keep her here, to claim ownership of the ship or authority over its new pilot, to maintain some control over a situation that had completely escaped their grasp when they returned. Their senior representative wore an expression that Kira had learned to recognize as resigned acceptance. "The Sunweaver is yours," he said, and each word sounded like it physically pained him to speak. "By the laws of our ancestors and the customs that have governed our civilization since before your species existed, you have the right to take it wherever you wish." "Thank you," Kira said. And she meant it. "But we ask one thing in return," the representative continued. "Not as a demand, not as a condition, but as a request from one people to another. Remember us when you are out there among the stars. Remember that we built this ship, even if we forgot how to make it sing." Kira stood up from her chair and walked toward the Sithrani, stopping just a few feet away from their towering forms. "I will remember," she said. "And when I find something worth sharing, I will come back and tell you about it." "That is a promise." The departure happened 3 days later, after Kira had loaded the Sunweaver with supplies and said goodbye to the few friends she had made in her years at the scrapyard. She stood on the bridge as the ship pulled away from the debris field, watching the dying red dwarf shrink in the view screen until it was just another point of light among millions. "Are you ready?" she asked the ship. Though she already knew the answer, the Sunweaver responded with a surge of joy that made her laugh out loud, its entire being vibrating with anticipation as the navigation systems came online and the star fragment blazed brighter in its crystal cage. Kira thought about a destination, and the ship plucked it from her mind before she could even vocalize it. The galactic rim, the very edge of mapped space, where the stars grew thin and the unknown began. The Sunweaver adjusted its heading, and then it did something that no human had ever experienced. It rode a beam of starlight. The acceleration was instantaneous and impossible, the ship converting itself into pure energy and traveling at speeds that made light itself seem slow. The stars outside the viewscreen stretched into lines and then disappeared entirely as the Sunweaver left the known galaxy behind like a memory. Kira felt the ship's exhilaration mixing with her own. Two souls sharing the same incredible moment, bonded together in a way that transcended species and technology and the simple categories of machine and pilot. They were something new, something that had never existed before. A human and a ship that ran on starshine and stubbornness and the absolute refusal to accept that anything was truly impossible behind them. The news continued to spread in the great councils of the galaxy. Politicians and scientists debated what it meant that a human had accomplished what the Sithrani could not in the taverns and trading posts. Spacers told the story of Kira Vance and the ship that drank starlight, embellishing it with each retelling until it sounded more like legend than history. And in the quiet corners of 100 worlds, other humans heard the story and felt something stir in their chests, a reminder of what their species was capable of when they refused to give up. The universe was vast and ancient and filled with wonders that no single lifetime could contain, but now there was a human out there among the stars, riding a vessel of crystal and light, searching for the next impossible thing to prove possible. And somewhere in the black between galaxies, Kira Vance smiled as her ship sank to her, and she knew that this was only the beginning. The stars had never looked brighter, and the journey had never felt more endless. And for the first time in her life, she understood what it truly meant to be free. The Sunweaver carried her forward into the unknown, and together they flew toward tomorrow.